Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. And I'm very excited to be here moderating what I hope will prove to be a really fascinating talk, looking at issues of inclusive growth and sustainability, which are really some of the most important, yet possibly some of the more elusive and, may I say, vague concepts that are bandied around. But yet, these are concepts that governments, that businesses, and indeed all of us as human beings in society really do have to contend with quite seriously and grapple with. What I want to do in our conversation today with our three panelists is to sort of move a little bit beyond the platitudes, beyond the generalizations, and try and ground the conversation to specifics, kind of really bore into the nitty-gritty, as it were. And of course, given our location, also to take a look at what Japan can do, looking at its potential as a leader in sustainability, but also perhaps some of the constraints that Japan and Japanese companies face when it comes to grappling with these issues. Before we kick off, just very quickly, I'd like to try and unpack some of these phrases and set the parameters for what they might mean. When we talk about sustainability, I think it's possible to try and look at sustainability from three different points of view. We have the economic, and when we discuss the economic, we're looking at issues primarily of income inequality, the environmental, including climate change, and of course, social, looking at issues of social justice. These are really the big three problems of our time. And the questions we want to try and examine are how businesses can thrive, how they can grow, while simultaneously playing a major role in solving some of these issues. How does a focus on sustainability enable businesses to play a positive, possibly transformational role in society? I think that perhaps the smartest and most successful businesses of the future will be those that support and work with local communities to help them to become more resilient. To financial shocks, to become more resilient to environmental shocks, and also to try to make sure that you don't get large sections of people who are left behind and left out of growth stories. We've already seen the implications of that in many parts of the world and the political and social turmoil that has caused. The panel over here doesn't really need detailed introduction. We have Lynn Kobayashi, chair of possibly one of the world's most innovative schools, UWC Japan. We have Sachiko Kuno, who wears many, many hats. Amongst them, she's the founder of a social venture incubator called Halcyon, based out of Washington, D.C. And we have Peter Morgan, who's senior consulting economist with the Asian Development Bank Institute. So let's start off this session with a question to Lynn. And I'd like to actually immediately take a specific example, if I may, to try and anchor some of these catchphrases that are in the title of our discussion. Let's talk about your school and how you think it fits into this kind of model of inclusive growth.
Thank you, Pallavi. So the school that we founded in 2014, United World College Japan, I think it really addresses this income inequality piece that you just mentioned. Traditionally, if you talk about international schools, international boarding schools, they're known to be very expensive and then very exclusive and only meant to be for wealthy families. We do exactly the opposite. So among 200 students, high school students we have on board, there are 73 nationalities, and then 70% of our students are on scholarship to ensure diversity. Traditionally, international schools used to pride themselves on having a lot of nationalities and calling themselves diverse. But that's not the diversity that we're looking at. We do have to ensure that different social and economic backgrounds are represented, that different religious beliefs are represented, and cultural backgrounds are represented, and that's what we do. What UWC United World College stands for is that in addition to 17 UWCs, which we are part of, We have national committees in 160 countries around the world with 3,000 plus volunteers aggressively outreaching and enriching and recruiting students in 160 countries. So that diversity, it cannot be achieved without scholarship, without those national committees. And that's what makes us unique.
Just a quick follow-up. This 70% of students who are on scholarship, is this specifically for the Japan school, or is this internationally, because UWC is an international chain of schools, right?
Great, thank you. So UWC actually used to be 100% scholarship for 100% students. We realized that was not sustainable. So now a lot of us do offer about 70% financial aid to about 70 to 80% of our student body. On monetary base, it accounts for about 50%. So that's what we do, universe, like globally.
Very interesting. Moving on possibly to Sachiko-san. So we're hearing that what we're really looking for are new business models that tackle both growth and sustainability simultaneously. So do you agree that this is what's really needed for the businesses of the future? And how do you think we can best sort of balance or harmonize interests such as bottom line, profits with more diffused goals like, say, intergenerational equity when it comes to environmental concerns, for example, and so on?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for giving me the great opportunity to be here. And I'm living in Washington, D.C., and operating an incubator, social venture incubator. And before that, I was a co-founder and the CEO of the biotech company. And I was born in Japan and educated in Japan, so that I know quite well, and a wonderful country. And I decided 22 years ago to go to the United States and to do the biotech business. So there's the 2012, I decided to step down from the business and to think about what I can do for the future and giving back to the society, community. Around that time, I was a little disappointed by seeing the pharmaceutical business, and that's the big pharma is only the focusing on the developed country and only the 1 billion people, and among 7 billion people we have in the world, because the pricing is too high for the people who is living in the developing countries. So I was quite disappointed to see that, because of as a CEO of the biotech company, because my background is biochemist and bioscience, and so that I believed to utilize our discovery to be giving a great medicine to all over the world, but eventually, because we are not, we cannot be afford enough to sell our drugs, so we really needed to have a marketing company, and so we gave the marketing right to the big pharma, and then realized that they are not interested in accessing to the other countries. So, but anyhow, so 5 years ago, I decided to think what I can do, and that's new business model, that's called profit and impact, or profit and purpose. Dual bottom line business model came to the United States. I think originally that it is born in UK and European countries, but I think especially for the millennial generation, the young people very much, I think, interested in knowing that business model, because we knew that the 21st century the business problem is very much complicated and very much difficult to solve. So that in order to solve those complicated social problems, we really need to have disruptive innovation. So that entrepreneurship is a key issue to reach a final goal to solve a very complicated the problem. So that we decided to open up some sort of incubator in Washington, D.C. The reason why Washington, D.C. is we are sure that we need to have some impact, and we need to give some the influence to the political side as well. So the political side, the social side, and the business side, all sectors need to be engaged and need to be involved to think about 21st century's issues, global issues. So that's what I'm doing. The Haoshun is a very old the historic house and 30,000 square foot house in Georgetown, old historic area. But normally, and that seems to be the just maintained as a old historic house or some sort of the museum, but I decided to repurpose that house itself to be an unusual place for the people to come and to sing. So that we have now the social venture incubator, residential incubator. Every 6 months we have 6 people from the worldwide. And in order to select only the 8 spots, we normally had 500 applications. So that is why so many young people are interested in thinking to solve the 21st century problem.
Just a follow-up over there, Sachiko-san. You talked about this whole idea of profit with purpose, profit with impact. But how mainstream do you think that can really become? Because, at the moment, social entrepreneurs exist, of course, but they still tend to be sort of add-ons. They're on the margins, on the fringes. Like the big businesses are still basically profit-driven. Do you see the possibility going forward in the 21st century for this becoming the mainstream model for how businesses are conducted?
Yeah, I think I'm believing in this business model will be the mainstream. And once we have the good investors, and also that if we can show that the profit, that you do not have to sacrifice the profit as well. So that what we're doing is we are encouraging the profit is very important to show the strengths this business model has. So that you do not have to sacrifice the profit, but you need measured impact as well. So that's the profit and impact, and so that we really need to have the 2 measurable points. And I think measuring the profit is very easy because that is dollar amount you can see. But I think impact, that we need to be carefully discuss and to determine what would be the impact, the social impact we have. And also that now recently triple bottom line model we are more focusing on because in addition to the economic growth and social impact, we really need to have some thought on environmental effect by doing anything in the world. So I think it's 3 things we need to think about. But I'd like to emphasize in social the business model or the dual business model, and we really need to show this model is strong enough to do some global, some economic growth as well. But I think that if you think that only the economic growth, you might create unnecessary market, or you might think unnecessary the consumption of the energy or something. So I think we really need to have 3 different angles and environment and profit, economic growth and the social impact as well. It is not so easy, but especially for the investor side, I really would like to have everyone think about to be the impact investor as well, because I think during our incubator, and we have the 50-50 gender balance, so that is an amazing thing. However, only 3% of the venture capital money would go to the women-led company. And also the financial industry, only 7% of the position, the decision-making position and the partner is occupied by women. So that is why we cannot have quite enough source to invest next generation people, especially for the minority and women. Yeah.
One of the best things about, one of the best things about this panel is that we have 3 really dynamic women on the panel. Asian women, sorry, Peter, but yeah, it's really wonderful. But moving on to you, Peter, you're with the ADB, and as a development bank, of course, almost all of the ADB's efforts are towards promoting sustainability, towards promoting inclusive growth. But can you help us to maybe think through how these goals are different from traditional notions of corporate social responsibility or traditional traditional notions of philanthropy? What makes goals like sustainability and inclusive growth different? How do companies have to respond to them differently than they have in the past?
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm delighted to be invited to participate in this panel. I mean, we at the ADB are, as you mentioned, primarily focused on things related to inclusive and sustainable growth, and that actually encompasses quite a few dimensions, as you mentioned earlier. Maybe if you show the slide now, I could go briefly through that. Yeah, so this is a slide I actually came across just a couple of weeks ago at the World Social Science Forum in Fukuoka, but it sort of shows symbolically that the donut, which you could characterize as the safe and just space, and also the basically sustainable and inclusive growth. And so inside you have the shortfalls, which are mostly in the areas of inclusion. So you have energy, water, food, health, education. Education certainly very important. Income in terms of income equality, as was mentioned, social justice, political voice, social equity, gender equality, housing, networks. So those are the things that we're trying to encourage to sort of build out to those levels where there are shortfalls. But on the other hand, we have the overshoots, which are primarily the environmental aspect. So you have ocean acidification, chemical pollution, nitrogen and phosphorus, freshwater withdrawals, land conversion, biodiversity loss, air pollution, ozone layer depletion, and climate change. And particularly, climate change is a big concern for us. And certainly the kinds of extreme weather that we've been seeing recently kind of adds support to those concerns. And so ADB is looking at lots of ways that it can directly work to sort of promote a convergence toward the sustainable donut, as it were. But we certainly believe that the multilateral banks alone are by no means sufficient to achieve those kinds of targets, that we do need to cooperate very significantly with the private sector. And we're doing that in a number of ways, through things like encouraging public-private partnerships, doing loan guarantee programs to assist companies which are involved in projects that we're trying to promote. Also technical assistance, trying to improve governance in local areas so that the operating environment of companies may be easier. Green finance is another area that we're very interested in trying to promote the financing of green energy investments and other kinds of green projects. So, and I think that green finance is very important. It's very important to develop the awareness of investors of the importance of that category of investment. So we're really trying to promote the development of, for example, green bonds as an asset class, so that in a sense we're trying to make it easier for corporations to behave in a way which is friendly to the environment as well as friendly to profits.
Addressing the second part of the question, which was how the commitment to sustainability differs from more traditional corporate social responsibility or philanthropy, is that something you could also address?
Well, I think it's more directed, I guess, in the sense that we're thinking of ways to influence corporate behavior that would directly sort of impact these kinds of objectives. So it's not just a question of philanthropy in general, but or CSR in general, but how would they specifically impact on these sustainable development goals? So I think it's a more a targeted approach, and we're kind of trying to offer carrots in that regard. But also I think other kinds of institutions can be considered too. For example, a carbon tax would be a good way to encourage corporations to invest in more green type energy, for example, so that it's sort of a combination of carrots and sticks, I guess.
So would you agree that it's basically looking at a more systematic approach, and corporate social responsibility would be just more sort of ad hoc projects? This is more about actually changing mindsets, about changing how you see your purpose in society and in a more long-term way.
Yes, I think it's more directed, that we basically have this kind of framework in mind. Now, of course, this encompasses a lot of things, particularly within the inner part of the donut there. There's a lot of sustainable of inclusivity issues, which corporate philanthropy in various aspects can address. But I think addressing the outer part probably takes more directed activity.
Lynn, going back to you, how much of a problem has Japan's rather rigid, possibly hierarchical regulatory framework been when it comes to achieving some of the goals? Let's take your school as an example once again. Were there any sort of specific regulatory restrictions that you faced? And how did you overcome these? What are some of the lessons for others in your story?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. I need to be very politically answering those questions. But I guess two things. A, there were so many regulatory frameworks that we have to overcome. B, the good news is that it was not that hard to overcome those. I'll give you a few examples. A, Japanese school law, for one thing, they stipulate that Japanese schools, elementary, K to 12, have to operate in April to March Japanese school calendar. We don't. All the international schools in Japan used to, they all sort of exist outside of Japanese system, but we're the first international school to be accredited by the Japanese government. And we are the first legitimate Japanese school that operates in international calendar. How did that happen? I went straight to Minister of Education and said, we want to operate an international calendar. Otherwise, we can't, accommodate the students and faculty from all over the world. And they go, there's a day school and an accredited-based school in Japan. In Japanese, Jennitsei and Tainsei. So the credit-based schools, what they do is that you can actually enroll any time of the year, and then as soon as you get all the credits, you can graduate. I was like, oh, that's convenient. What if all of our students happen to enter in September and happen just by chance, get all the credits simultaneously, and then just by pure coincidence, they graduate in June together. Is that illegal? They go, oh, that's legal. That was that. I'll give another example. Japanese teaching certificate law stipulates that those credits have to be given by the Japanese certified teachers. None of our faculty members are certified teachers. They come from all over the world. We have about 100 applicants for one job posting from all over the world. So they're not certified. I go to Nagano Prefecture and said, I looked around and said, what about that university professor who comes into a local high school and gives a credit? What is he entitled to do? And they go, there's a special certificate. Oh, convenient again. Can we apply it for special certificates? They go, no. There have been only 2 special certificates in the history of Nagano Prefecture. They were both Nobel Prize nominees, and they were very, very renowned professors of university. I said, is that written in the law? No. The only thing that law requires is that A, you have a sufficient knowledge of a subject. B, you're a very passionate educator. I'm like, how vague can it be, right? Like everyone on my faculty should qualify. So we applied for the certificates, and they all got special certificates. So there are so many of those examples. My point here is that everyone thinks Japan is such a rigid, I guess, bureaucratic rules, exactly. But the reality is, if you carefully study the law and then talk to the the minister people and the government officials with the right purpose and right cause, they will come your way and help you. And that's what we've been learning throughout this project. And that's why I'm very, very hopeful that social entrepreneurship in Japan will happen and is happening.
So it's important not to kind of give up too early or just by looking at the laws, but to kind of try to find loopholes, or perhaps loopholes is too big a word, but a way through the regulatory maze by trying to be innovative, thinking out of the box, perhaps. But that is something that Japan is not that famous for. So don't you think that that in itself is a constraint, telling sort of Japanese people that you need to be more sort of comfortable with improvisation? That's a very Indian thing. You know, we're very proud of jugaad in India, which is improvisation and always finding the kind of loophole. It seems to be almost the opposite of what traditional Japanese culture is. So are you seeing that change amongst younger people? Are you seeing that change also at the bureaucratic level? Because until you really start seeing the system changing, it's like a stranglehold for younger ventures.
I definitely do think that there is a rise of entrepreneurship and almost a sense of possibility in this country and in the younger generation. And I think we have become a very small but a beacon for change and vanguard for change in Japanese education system. And today, I'd say that at least 20 to 30 people per year would come to me with a new educational entrepreneur project in their mind. And then they are very entrepreneurial, and they can think out of the box. And I started, my next project is for the next decade is an accelerator for those education entrepreneurs in Japan. So I've been doing this for 10 years now, and my head runs the school. I only chair the board sort of as a support. So that's my next project. And then because I do feel that there are so many people out there, with just a little help and assistance, they will make things happen.
Thank you for sharing that. Going back to Sachiko Kuno-san, could you give us some concrete examples, perhaps from your incubator, of companies that have been doing what you talked about, the profit with purpose? So we have some examples of what exactly we mean by that, companies that can actually make a profit, turn a profit, and at the same time have an impact.
Yeah, I think the one example I have that's called Once Upon the Acres. They are creating an entirely new type of baby food and for the American the market and the mom and dad and who is concerned about the nutrition of the baby food has. But a wonderful thing they have created is because once the parent pay that to buy that the baby food, the percentage, some percentage of the revenue would go to the mom and dad who cannot afford to buy those food outside of the United States. So that is one example. And another thing is regarding to the climate change issues. Coral Vida, that's the name is Coral Vida. That has created an amazing technology to grow the coral 50 times faster than ever, so that they can utilize that technology to create a coral, and also that's and they are earning money from the I think the hotels and other industries and who are very much interested in having coral and as a natural. So I think that very much the economic side and the impact side, that they can combine these things, and also thinking the other location to help the people living in the other location or something like that. So I think that is a very much disruptive idea that we are seeing every day. So the why we really need a disruptive idea and the disruptor now is, I think you are listening to it every day, and then we need innovation or creativity. But why? People doesn't know quite well why we need creativity and also there's diversity. Why do we need diversity? I think that what I think is because we are living in an emergency era. So that's it. We have the tsunami or other. I think that's a very much natural disaster or the economic crisis, or I think the population is growing and everything is growing very much potentially. So that is, I think no one can predict what will be happening 10 years later or 20 years later. So that is, we are living in uncertainty, and that's called an Anthropocene. I think you might be very much familiar with that name. So that we might be getting into the new epoch after 12,000 years. So we are very much happy to be living in one epoch, 12,000 years, that is best matching to the human being. But because a human being has found fossil fuel 200 years ago, and to start using those and to change the planet itself. And 1950, and after the 1950, we already see the great acceleration and the process, and that includes everything is growing and exponentially, and so that is, we cannot see what is happening 5 years later, 10 years later, and we cannot utilize the knowledge we have 10 years ago. For example, iPhone, we didn't have the iPhone 15 years ago. So such kind of very dynamic and emergency type of era we are living in, that would be very much interesting, and for the scientists and for the artists and for the entrepreneur. But I think for all 7 billion people, and we really need to be very much innovative and creative, and to think what we can do for the future. So that investment to the future is one of the key issues for human beings to survive. Not only the sustainability, but also the survivability. We need to be, all of us need to be very much innovative and also unleash your potential to maximize your creativity and innovation, and to prepare for the future. So that is why, and we are very much,
Wonderful, thank you. Peter, what do you think is the role of governments when it really comes to businesses achieving sort of goals of sustainability? Do you think it's necessary for governments to kind of regulate businesses more, or is it best for them just to sort of step back and let businesses come up with their own best practices and kind of, see the light, as it were?
I mean, one of the main arguments for government intervention in business behavior is the idea of market failure and of a divergence of private and social returns. And I think climate change, for example, is a perfect example of that, that if firms don't pay the cost of the impact of their emissions on the environment, on the rising temperature, but that very much has a social cost. And so the kind of least ideal intervention from an economic perspective, for example, is something like a carbon tax, where firms would essentially pay a tax on their carbon emissions, which would reflect the social costs and which are basically the environmental costs of those emissions. So that that sort of basic concept of market failure, which drives a lot of arguments for government interventions. Now, that doesn't mean that governments are perfect, and certainly governments have the potential to make things worse, as to create greater deviations from what might be an ideal outcome than otherwise. And so I think governments have to be very careful in the way they make those interventions. But in the case of environment in particular, I think there's a fairly clear argument that you do need some kind of regulation to get pollution into the sustainable range. Certainly, China is a good example of that. The pollution had gotten quite bad in some of the urban areas there. Now the Chinese government seems to be taking more aggressive steps to try to get that under control, and I think are showing some signs of success. Certainly, if you look at greenhouse gas emissions per dollar of GDP, for example, it's already declining quite significantly, and I expect that they will make further progress in that regard. In terms of other social goals, again, they can provide some sort of support for development of things like green finance and green bonds. They can also create tax incentives to invest in green technology, that sort of thing. Also, of course, government has a big role in income distribution. Certainly, going back to that chart, incomes and particularly greater income equality is one of the Millennium Development Goals, and that can be achieved somewhat through tax and transfer type systems. Now again, these systems are rarely perfect, and they can sometimes not be very helpful or actually move in the wrong direction. So that it's not a panacea by any means. But I think those are some of the ways that the government can intervene. Also, various obvious examples would be a public education, particularly at the elementary and secondary levels, a provision of health services, public health improvements. I think have played a very important role in promoting longer and healthier lives in various countries.
You mentioned, Peter, about the Chinese government and the sort of helpful role it's had when it comes to pollution. What do you think, what would you give the Japanese government, an A, B, C, or D on their report card when it comes to policies that are supportive of sustainability?
Well, I think it's been quite a positive result overall. The first time I came to Japan was 1972. I visited, I was doing my backpacker round trip of Japan, and I visited the city of Kitakyushu on Kyushu Island, and that was the home of one of, I guess, the largest steel plant in Japan at the time. And I remember I got up at 7 o'clock in the morning, blue sky. By 8 o'clock in the morning, the sky was black. It really was black, and so they had terrible pollution at that time. Of course, they had other issues, Minamata disease, that kind of thing, and it took a while for the government to respond, but eventually they did. Now, of course, some of the improvement has been more of a byproduct of the hollowing out of Japanese industry. A lot of industrial activity has been shifted abroad to countries like China, and so there's an argument that perhaps environmental regulation has an undesirable side effect of just shifting the polluting activity to other countries, and I think there's some validity to that. But again, those countries in turn have to take responsibility to try to control the pollution activities of the companies within their jurisdiction.
So I think we'll be opening up to questions quite soon. But before that, just one last quick question for Lynn. If you could talk a little bit about the school again and the model, because you said that 70% come from scholarships. So what is the financing model? Like, is this a for-profit enterprise? Do you turn a profit? And then where does that come from?
Thank you. So this is a non-profit organization, but we are at the moment sustainable because of the government's taxation policy. In Japan, our annual operation cost is about $10 million US, and 3 to 4 million comes through what we call furusato noze, which is home taxation structure. What this does is, in Japan, usually donations are income deductible and not tax deductible. Through home taxation system, people can actually, Japanese taxpayers can actually contribute to local governments and then get tax return. So it's a tax deductible contribution system. This is much easier for people to give. And when I went to Karuizawa town in 2011, I think, asked them to add us to their menu of home taxation structure. They literally laughed at me and kicked me out of the room. They're like, this is taxation. Like, we cannot allocate a part of taxation money to a private school. But Japan is all about precedence, right? So I studied every single home taxation structure in Japan. There's one example in Kumamoto where public prefecture-run public high schools were supported through Furusato Nose. So that's pretty similar enough, right? And then it's a school, and we're schools too. So we said, oh, there's a president. And then they're like, oh, if there's a president, we can do it. And from that day on, we have become the first private school to be added to the menu of Furusato Nose structure, home taxation structure, and that accounts for about 85 to 90% of our scholarship funds every year.
That's wonderful, and another example of trying to kind of find the way rather than giving up when you're told it's not possible, not taking no for an answer, right?
I have to give, it's not my idea. It was like my intern, student intern. She ran around and studied everything when I was about to give up. And she goes, oh, I found a president. And that was thanks to her. So it's not like I've been sounding like I did all this, but no. We've been supported by so many people who believed in our mission. And that's why we're here.
So we have about 17 minutes for question and answers, and I really want to open this up to make this more of a conversation with the audience as well. The way we'll do it is take 2 or 3 questions at a time, and then please try to keep the questions short, and also let me know who you'd like to answer your question. Please go ahead.
Exciting here about the schools. I'm running a chain with 100 schools, 25,000 students in Sweden, Holland, India, Saudi Arabia, United States. I have tried to discuss this with Japan too, but it has been very closed. Do you see it as an opportunity now for an international chain to come and offer its services and start schools for, not an international, but for Japanese students in Japan?
Lynn, we'll wait for 2 more questions. Please go ahead.
Question to Kobayashi. Very impressive. The way you managed to overcome hurdles is by you spending a lot of time to read every regulation, right? Our sense is, I don't think it's only me. Japan seems to be really behind in terms of creating youngsters who can be effectively productive in the diverse global environments. And for that, we need leadership from Ministry of Education. So how do you see Ministry of Education transforming itself?
Okay, and one more question.
Yeah, possibly question to Kuno-san. There is a, how can I say, feeling that doing good is important, but someone will do on behalf of me. How can we shift the people's mind more to sustainability? What can we do?
Maybe Lynn, if you could start.
Great, thank you for the first question. Peye? Thank you. I definitely do see there's a need there's a chance and strong demand for such education. The affordability, I think, is the key. Our school obviously provide a lot of scholarships, and that's why, despite the high tuition, a lot of people, Japanese people apply. But for Japanese people, the affordability for international school, a lot of international schools charge 30 to 40, 50,000 US dollars per year, and that is not very affordable to Japanese population. If you can tackle that hurdle for whatever, then I think there's obviously a chance, an opportunity. I actually serve on the Academy Council for GEMS education, and their sort of middle-income affordable model. I think that might be something that Japan could need. So I'd love to have a talk afterwards. Thank you. Second question about Ministry of Education transforming itself. I know there have been a number of unfortunate incidents in the ministry, as you may be aware of. But if you talk to the officials themselves, I think they are still very passionate about transforming Japan's education. And it's a matter of timing, I think. Every major reform needs to wait for a policy window to open. And that time, there's a lot of preparations that are happening on the ground that haven't really yet to see the policy window. But when the time comes, I think there are a number of officials within the ministry who are ready to take an action. And there are big plans. And so I'm waiting for that policy window to open myself. Thank you.
Kono-san.
Yes, I think that is a very good question. And so what we're trying to do is I think that's the weird that we would like to show what is action we can do and to create a momentum and movement for the people to understand how they are quite important to do. They're doing good, and by showing that. So I think that even the small example, and we normally encourage people to do. And so there's not only the talking about the visionary and the vision instead. We like to to show what is the outcome and the impact we really that created by this idea. And also the public communication is quite important now. So that's, and we have maximized to use a social network system, and so that the people can access what are we doing. And also there's at least 2 events in Haotian we created, and so that especially that is not standard type of the events or symposium, and a much more active side. So for example, the pitch day, and for the fellow could access to the investors, the government people, or some foundation top people. So that I think the more physical the contact or the sharing time and space is some sort of the quite powerful way to be sharing, and what we're doing is good for the society and for the world. So that we are trying to both to use both virtual way and also the in-person physical way to be shared. So I think in what is a fascinating thing for me to see in Haotian is because the passion is contagious in this, so that by sharing time space, just like today, and the passion and the people has could be contagious to other people, and who can following and who can think and new idea and to do the good things. So that is what we're doing.
This is a question for Peter, I think. Peter, it's a question about your donut. Which is a very lovely donut, by the way. I didn't see on it, either on the, well, particularly on the overshoot, wealth overshoot. It's there. Didn't see wealth overshoot, the huge concentration of wealth in the hands of a very few, and income inequality related to it. And that clearly has got a relationship with many of the shortfall issues as well. Where does wealth inequality play in this picture?
Maybe this is a question to Kuno-san. Having you looked upon all the technologies in the bio and sciences space, where do you think Japan has a strength in, and maybe some of those dimensions over there, in bio, science, agriculture, healthcare, sustainability-related technologies? Where does Japan have some strengths, and where would you want to nurture investments into when you think about Japan with your global kind of platform knowledges?
Start with these 2.
It doesn't appear so strongly in this chart, I have to say. Now, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, which have been adopted by the United Nations, they do have a specific item on income equality or inequality. And so I think that's a probably more direct addressing of that issue. Here it's a little bit vague, but this more or less maps pretty well onto the Sustainable Development Goals. But obviously, wealth inequality and income inequality have become big issues, both within countries and across countries. And I think it's generally recognized that reduced inequality is an important dimension of sustainable growth.
Okay. Yes. I think that is probably that we need to think about what's the difference of the invention and innovation. So there's many people in Japan said that the Japanese people is not so good to create 0 to 1, 1 to 10. However, in my opinion, I think that there's so many Japanese people, the younger people, is very much great to think about what is the entire new invention. However, I think in order to reach final goal, that is a social and impact issue, that we really need to have innovation. So that innovation is only when the society has accepted that invention, the starting and the change, that the society can see the innovation. So I think that probably that Japanese people has a lot of the talent to create a new idea, new thing. However, quite unfortunately, that is the lack of the people who can do that to connect invention stage to the innovation stage. That is the tough, and however, that they need to have some project management issues and financial issues, and very much patient enough to spend their passion and money and idea and everything. So I think I like to encourage Japanese people to think about from the innovation to the from the invention to the innovation is there's some sort of the time lag and the time, and so that I think that's I think that's just Lin-san said, and to think about how to get the final outcome or how to get final social impact, you need to be creative as well to think about the first idea. And because I can have the first idea, however, without doing the process to reach a final innovation thing, we cannot give any impact to the society. Yeah.
So perhaps Lin and Kuno-san, this is a controversial statement. I'm going to make it and tell me what you think. Does Japan has an innovation problem? Yes or no? Or Peter. I mean, Peter, you've been here for a long time and very much sort of looking in from the outside. So it would be great to have your perspective as well.
Yeah, a couple of things. First, in terms of the supply side, Japan is an aging society. You know, it's I guess the most aged in the world these days, certainly amongst advanced countries. And there's pretty clear evidence that aging is inversely related to innovation. And so if you look at formation of new companies, that kind of thing, Japan is clearly lagging most of its advanced country peers. And then on the supply side, or on the demand side, probably the key issue is the lack of finance for startups. Particularly venture capital market. That's I think pointed to consistently as a big gap in Japan. There are certain recent developments which have been positive developments of crowdfunding platforms, that sort of thing. But in terms of venture capital specifically, I think there's still a big gap there. Let's see. Anything else?
On that?
Yeah, sure.
Because, I think that's a great point about lacking the capitalists, the venture capitals who are funding the entrepreneurs. I'd like to welcome, I guess, is that okay if I called Koji? Because I think there's a very interesting trend in Japan where instead of traditional venture capitalists, entrepreneurs themselves. He's one of the renowned entrepreneur in Japan who has produced one of the very few unicorns in biotech, producing squeezing microorganism to produce
Is this
fuel.
the algae?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
I've actually written about
this
that.
green
It's
tie.
fantastic. Jet fuel, I believe, right? Yes.
So his firm is now investing in a lot of bio startups, and also like Mercari, they're investing in a lot of other high-tech companies. So now entrepreneurs are actually reproducing entrepreneurs, I think, and that's why I decided to do what I'm doing. Instead of relying on traditional venture capitalists, perhaps. Obviously, GLOBIS is exceptional, but obviously, of course. But I think as an entrepreneur or as an educator myself, I need to be accelerating education entrepreneurs, and then I think we see similar trends happening in small different pockets of the industry, which is very encouraging.
I think I spent 22 years in the United States, and I haven't had chance to be spending more than 10 days until the last year. So that's why I am coming back to Japan. Is I have the chance to teach a student at Kyoto University, and also the thinking to move the housing model to Japan, if that's possible. But I realize that it's not a good idea for me to think and to move the housing model as it is. So instead, what we thought is we created a for-profit organization. Housing itself is non-profit, but for-profit organization here, and to have the triple win model, that is the corporate organization and society and individuals. So that I think that the why that we gave up to have to move the housing model to Japan is so many talents are still belonging to the big corporate and government and so big organization, and so that even though they have a great idea and a great thought, and they cannot utilize their thought inside of the company. But I think that the amazing thing for me to run is even the executives of big corporate has concern about that. They're trying to support them to think about the entire new thing. So what we created, and we are going to open the next year, is that the triple win model. The corporate could create some incubator, and so that we can license the housing and the knowledge and the scale into this incubator. So this corporate can be sponsored, and from the individual side, they do not need to quit and working in the big organization. Instead, they can come to the incubator in an unusual place in Kyoto. And however, they can more focusing on their own idea and to create a business model until they get the investors. So I think maybe the parent company could be investor as well, or if the parent company would like to buy back their idea and in order to create some subsidiary company, and that would be okay. So I think that Japan have the great potential to create the innovation and innovation for the future. So there's probably we do not have to use only one model, the Silicon Valley model or United States model. Instead, I think in order to create the ecosystem itself, I think that we need to be available to think entire new model for creating a new ecosystem for Japan.
That's wonderful. The timekeeper tells me that we are in the dying moments of this panel now. So speak now or hold your silence forever. Last chance for a quick question. Anyone? Yes.
Very simple question for three of you. Tell me about your vision in the next 10 years. What does the ideal 10 years from now look like from your perspective?
We're going to need 15 seconds per person.
For me, I'd love to see more education entrepreneurs in Japan, as I spoke about. So I'm going to make that happen.
So I'd like to see the people and 10 years later unleash their potential to think everything new.
I'd like to see the reforms that Prime Minister Abe has been talking about for the last 5 years be implemented.
What a wonderful panel and what a wonderful audience. And I think what's especially pleasing about it is that we're actually leaving on quite an upbeat and optimistic note. The fact that, things are not all doom and gloom in Japan. It might be an aging society, but we are seeing a lot of entrepreneurship. We are seeing the potential for new models. We are seeing the potential for growth and a kind of can-do spirit where it is possible to change. It is possible to find new ways. So I will leave you with that. Thank you very much for being here with us this afternoon. And thank you to our three fantastic panelists.